English with deck. Okay, now today I just want to talk a little bit about something that is close to my heart. Something I experience every day to a degree. It's kind of funny, probably relatable to many people. And that is simply cultural misunderstandings. I'm not talking about those huge, oh my god moments. No, 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 no. Nothing crazy. No, no, no. Just mundane, simple misunderstandings through communication. And they make you think, what? What just happened? What did you say? Those kind of things. I think if you're living with someone from a different cultural background, I should say, misunderstandings will happen. And if you're friends with people from a different cultural background to yourself, misunderstandings will happen. That's normal. It's natural. You know? I feel the communication style is different, and that's natural. People who have learned a language for many years, put lots of effort in and stuff. One thing these people will quite often aim to achieve for after gaining a great vocabulary, a great grammar knowledge, is sounding native in that target language. And when I say sounding native, I don't just mean the accent, I mean the communication personality, the communication style. Maybe the way they think, maybe the way they select their words would change to adapt to the culture. I think a great example of this is in England, in British English, we think out loud so much. People say things whilst they are processing thoughts, and I don't mean it's the sort of thing of think before you speak. Doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing. But for example, I might think, oh, I fancy a sandwich. But then, for example, my wife might say, well, make a sandwich then. But that doesn't necessarily mean I want a sandwich. It's just me thinking that. Whereas, for example, if my wife was to say, oh, I fancy a sandwich, she would probably be on her way to make one, or at least have a plan in mind to make one. It's these little differences. And that even goes all the way to sort of processing thoughts, And for example, we might say, maybe we could do this or could do that. What do you think? However, for some other people, for example, my wife again, I'll use her as an example, might sort of silently think before speaking. Not this is very general, of course, as with all, I think, yeah, more or less all language points, it is quite general, especially when it comes to culture. But one thing I've noticed from my friends who are, say, Japanese people, or my family, who are obviously Japanese here, is that British people do tend to think out loud. We'll start talking before we've fully decided what we mean. One way I think to summarize this is, and make it easy to understand, is that I will say things very rapidly while thinking, whereas my wife will assume each idea is a serious decision, not just a brainstorming point. Sometimes I'm just exploring an idea out loud, but it can sound like I've already made the decision. I think this is a really interesting point with linguistics. And the reason I mentioned this today is because, well, we had a misunderstanding. And I thought, it happened. Okay. But then I thought, wait, this is a great opportunity to share this cultural difference with you guys, the listeners of English with Deck. Maybe you've had some cultural misunderstandings yourself with your friends, with your family, with extended family, with strangers. Maybe you haven't yet. But either way, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, that's all for today. So enjoy your evening, enjoy your day, and see you next time.